This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Since October 7th, my guest this week has led the investigations into the claims made by the Israeli government about what exactly happened on October 7th. As a result of his investigations, much of the world has changed its story about that day, as has the Israeli government itself. We're now living in a new world in which the war in Gaza means very different things to most of us, in large part because of the work of my guest. This is my interview with Max Blumenthal. I am joined from Washington, D.C. by Max Blumenthal. The busiest person in journalism I know, who's doing just amazing work always, but especially since October 7th. I just want to say, Max, I think that I've read and listened to and watched, I think, everything you've done since October 7th, and it is just undoubtedly essential that you follow Max Blumenthal these days if you're interested at all in what's going on in Gaza, but in Israel and Palestine generally. The reporting you've been doing, the analysis you've been doing on your own live streams, on the Grayzone, on other people's shows is just simply one of a kind. I know Electronic and Intifada and Mondo Wise have been doing similar work, but I mean, you're really, and I think a lot of people think this, you're kind of our leader, those of us who are opposing this war. And we wouldn't know a lot without your work. And let's talk about sort of recent events, but then I really want to broaden it out because you spend most of your time talking about recent events. And I want to talk about some deeper analyses and arguments that you've made over the years, both in your books and elsewhere, sort of about the meaning of Israel, the meaning of Zionism, its history, and then the meaning of the Palestinian resistance. So, but first, let's talk about what's happening now. And this will lead right into, I think, a discussion about the nature of Zionism, because when I started following this issue and teaching about it, this was 2003, and I was professor at Columbia at the time, and this was the second Intifada. And that was when it seemed to me and a lot of people that very clearly, with so many people from the West Bank and Gaza coming in and blowing themselves up on buses in Tel Aviv or on the streets and killing civilians in just utterly vicious, ruthless ways, there's no two ways about it. The thing that seemed clear to me was that the right wing in Israel was correct. The right wing in Israel was correct, and that what they were saying was the Palestinians will never accept us. They will never accept a two-state solution because they'll never accept a state of Israel. And I kind of thought that that was right, given what happened with the second Intifada. Now, I know that the people who actually did the suicide bombings, et cetera, represent a tiny portion of the population of Palestine. But it did seem also like it was broadly popular. And since then, over the last 20 years, we have seen that development. We've seen most of the Israeli public move to that position, that it is impossible to deal with these people, that we will have to find a way to either remove them or kill them. And then you also see, I suppose, from the Palestinian resistance, although I'd really need to hear from you on this because I'm not quite as clear about this, but I think October 7th was sort of the latest demonstration of that as well. Maybe, maybe not, that it's another example of a rejection of the state of Israel as a whole, that they will simply not accept the existence of a Jewish ethno-state of any kind on that land. Now, what we now see, though, for 20 years until October 7th, I thought, well, that's it. And I think even you saw this and felt this way. I know Norm Finkelstein felt this way. By sort of even this year, a couple of years ago, it seemed like a lost cause, the saddest, most tragic lost cause possibly in history, but that it simply wasn't going to, the Palestinians were never going to win. Israel was not going to go away. Well, the whole world has changed in the last 4 months now. And this is for the first time in my life that I am actually I'm thinking about telling friends of mine who live in Israel to at least start thinking about long range plans. Because given what happened just this week and last week, it looks to me like the whole world is arrayed against Israel. They are fighting on 6 fronts with how many different militias and nations at war with them? The American public is solid majority for a ceasefire. There are people like me who were sort of non-Zionists before, meaning I just didn't want to support the project. But if Jews wanted to go try to establish an ethno-state in the middle of the Middle East, have good luck with that. I don't want my country to have anything to do with it. But I'm now an anti-Zionist because it's clear that this project of Zionism, left to run its course, will lead us to now, where we are on the brink of at least a regional war, if not more than that. Do you see it the same way? Is Israel finally, after 140 years of the Zionist project and 75 years of the state of Israel itself, is this the moment when Israel really is facing an existential threat, not from really the Palestinian people, but I would say from the rest of the world? Is this how you see it at all?
The question of whether Israel is facing an existential crisis or whether Israel's existence faces an imminent possibility of disintegration. I mean, what
would you tell a friend you care about who lives in Israel whether they should plan to live there for the next 5, 10 to 20 years?
Well, pretty much I have had Zionist friends there, like hardcore Zionists. And I can't talk to them anymore. They might even talk to me. I just can't talk to them because I'm just so ashamed of what they've become. I guess that's a personal issue. So my friends in Israel are anti-Zionist Jews, and I encourage them to stay and resist because there are eyes and ears on the ground. I wouldn't have been able to do my book Goliath without them. So I'm not really answering your question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
Zionism has failed. October 7th was sort of the nail in the coffin of the Zionist idea, because Zionism was supposed to grant Jews 2 things in its original form as conceived by Theodore Herzl. Number 1, Jewish sovereignty. Well, that had never existed. Israel's existence as a Jewish ethno-state, as a Herrenvolk, quote unquote, democracy, is completely contingent on its direct line to the Gentile authorities in Washington and Brussels. And I guess Brussels is mostly controlled by Washington.
Right.
So there's no Jewish sovereignty there. Now, I saw Netanyahu in an interview at this neoconservative British clown Douglas Murray declare that Israel's ready to go it alone. Israel going it alone. Well, you want to see people go it alone? Look at Gaza. Israel going it alone wouldn't last a week against those people. And Zionism was supposed to provide Jewish security. I mean, most importantly, given the history of Jews in Western Europe throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, Jewish security was the obvious marketing point for Zionism. And it was the justification for transforming Israel into this kind of Spartan, hyper-militarized state that operated along the lines not of Theodore Herzl's view of Zionism, which was sort of, Herzl never really got to go and be a part of the colonization of Palestine. It was sort of Chaim Weizmann, who was the disciple of Herzl, and his idea was that the Arabs are stupid and can easily be bribed, so we're just going to create a class of collaborators and sellouts, and we'll just weaken them through our presence and our superior education. That failed, so they went with the Iron Wall model of Zeb Jabotinsky, who is provided the ideological lodestar to the Likud camp in Netanyahu, which is just a wall of bayonets, continuous violence against the indigenous Arab population. And by the way, Jabotinsky acknowledged Palestinians as a indigenous nation that had to be eliminated for the Jewish state to exist and thrive. And so Jewish security has failed completely. October 7th exposed that. And now Israel is engaged in an international campaign to get the Gentile states to provide it with as much weapons as possible, the Gentile world, against the Islamic world, not just the Palestinians, and to carry out military action on their behalf against the Islamic world, at least the part of the Islamic world that refuses to accept Zionism or negotiate with it. And for the first time since 1973, Israel's borders have changed. It's not an official change in borders, but in effect, they have changed. So I can tie that into an incident that took place last week east of the Maghazi refugee camp in the central area of the Gaza Strip.
Right.
I mean, this is a base of resistance. It's faced some of the most hideous airstrikes by the Israeli army, killing hundreds. And Israel killed 70 people just at random in December in the Maghazi camp, and then said, oh, whoops, we used the wrong weapon. That was their excuse. So now what Israel is doing, the Israeli military, is in the areas between the exclusively Jewish settlements or kibbutzim or moshavim, those are sort of cooperative farming communities, whatever you want to call them, which are on the Israeli side. There's not really a border. On the Israeli side of the 67 border with Gaza, they're going to the Palestinian side of that border and trying to create a buffer zone and actually trying to change the borders of the Gaza Strip through the deployment of massive amounts of explosives. So first they send in airstrikes, attack these areas when they still had civilians in them, and hope that, maybe we'll take out some tunnels as well. We'll use like heavy GBU bombs, and we'll take out as many of the evil terrorists as we can. And then we're going to send in special forces and tanks and bulldozers and just pulverize everyone on the ground. And then we're going to send in our engineering corps, which is a major component of the Israeli military because they destroy so many Palestinian houses. It's a central part of Zionism, is the destruction of the Palestinian hearth and home. And so in east of Maghazi, between there and a community called Kisufim in the Gaza envelope, which faced some threats on October 7th, the engineering corps came in, the engineering corps, after all of these attacks. And the Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, lay in wait. They had not attacked the infantry that came in. They had actually not attacked for weeks because they knew that this was coming. And the engineering corps was there to blow up entire neighborhoods. And as they lay down their explosive charges, which are connected through wires through various homes, so they could blow up like 12 city blocks at once, Al-Qassam attacked with RPGs. They hit a tank and they hit the engineering corps and detonated those charges. And hitting the tank also caused rescue crews to come in, and so they subsequently were attacked. And the Al-Qassam teams actually got away. 21 Israeli soldiers were killed and over 30 wounded. And what were they doing? They were trying, this is the worst attack for the Israeli military throughout the war. What were they doing? Like, what was their objective? Their objective was to change the borders of Gaza in order to allow the Jews, the Jewish Israelis, to come back to Kisufim and the other communities in the Gaza envelope. These engineering corps brigades have been in the Gaza Strip, blowing up entire neighborhoods east of Khan Yunis for about 2 weeks now or more. And they're proudly doing it. You know, they post the videos on Instagram. It's ethnic cleansing. It's taunting the Biden administration. Tony Blinken said, you know, we will not allow them to change the borders. But it really cuts to the essence of the existential failure of the existential threat Israel faces and the failure of Zionism, because they are not able to send their own people back to their homes until they can ethnically cleanse large parts of Gaza, reduce the whole place to ruins. And it's the same in the north, in the areas that abut southern Lebanon, the occupied areas. The northern communities of Israel are mostly depopulated. Their borders are effectively changed. And what Hezbollah is doing there is pretty sophisticated, because they've figured out a hole in Israel's air defenses, you know, the Iron Dome and David's Sling. When something goes up, they shoot it. Rockets, you know, sometimes they can even take out other explosive devices like mortars. But Hezbollah is using Cornet wire-guided anti-tank missiles, which fire, they tend to go along a straight line. They can go for like 8 kilometers, and they're able to guide them very precisely and hit Israeli army bases as well as population centers. And in the population centers in the north, what they'll do is they'll like hit a greenhouse or a factory, which is something that Israel's done to Lebanon for years, but they're doing it just to send a message. You can't come back to your communities until you stop assaulting Gaza. So this is the existential crisis for Israel. Economically, all of these people from the south and the north have to be supported by the state. And they're talking about it in Israel in terms of kind of like another COVID situation where they have to, the finance minister has to empty the state coffers to pay for hotels for people and to basically pay them, along with all the army reservists who've been in Gaza, who are just, you know, guys who are small business owners. I think one of the writers for the Israeli show Fauda, which was killed in Gaza. So you have all these people who are like professionals. Some of them are even upper middle class. They're not able to work. So the economy is strained. Israel depends heavily on foreign investment. And Netanyahu is talking about continuing this war throughout the entire year. So it is an existential crisis for Israel. And in order for them to resolve this existential crisis, they have to threaten the very existence of Palestinians, which is why they have moved into the genocidal phase. And what I've been saying for years is the Israeli objective never was to have a two-state solution or to have a real political solution at all. It was always to finish 1948, to find a different mechanism of finishing the job. And the labor camp in you know, the Zionist labor camp saw a sort of the peace process and two-state solution as a means towards completing 1948 by establishing hard separation with Palestinians through walls, separating the Gaza Strip from the West Bank, and allowing the settlers to create miniature walls and cantons within the West Bank. Most settlers moved into the West Bank, most of them, or more than under any other administration, under Ehud Barak from the Labor Party and the Jeffrey Epstein Party. And the Gaza Strip was, you know, it always had like barbed wire, but the real hard barriers that went up started to go up under Yitzhak Rabin, who himself laid plans with his, I think, labor minister, Haim Ramon, to they laid the groundwork for what would become the separation wall or the apartheid wall in and around the West Bank, which formally went up in 2004, 2005. So they had the solution, but the solution we're seeing now is something that is far beyond that. And it's sort of the messianic Jewish nationalist solution or version of finishing 48. And it is fully genocidal.
Yeah, I think this is one of your most important interjections in this, is the argument you've made many times. I've barely seen anyone else say this. I'm sure others have, but I just haven't seen many people say it. But, you know, American pro-Israel people, sort of Zionists, like the public intellectuals, the journalists who are basically, to me, propping up this war. I don't know a single one of them, and I know many of these personally, by the way. I don't know a single one of them who endorses the Netanyahu government. In fact, they're almost all critical, right? And they'll say, "Oh, I'm very critical of many Israeli policies, and always have been, and I feel so sad for the Palestinians, and I didn't like it when they did this massacre and that bombing, but we must defend the state of Israel, et cetera, et cetera." And what I think the argument you've been making and that I've been making for a long time is that it doesn't ultimately matter, right, which government is there. The project and the logic of Zionism are going to inevitably lead us to something that looks like Gaza. Something. I mean, maybe not exactly those contours, but there is an inevitable conflict. Jabotinsky in the Iron Wall and Herzl in the Jewish state, both and other Zionists, early Zionists they said, yeah, Palestinians are this conquered nation. And like all conquered nations, they will always resist. They will always resist us, which is why we need an iron wall, which is why we must always fight. They knew this. They knew that this was inevitable and eternal. And so did Truman's cabinet in 1948. They said, don't recognize this state. It will be in perpetual war. But it looks to me like, again, sort of the anti-Zionist analysis has been proven right here. I mean, again, it still exists. The war is still going on, but it's never reached this pitch, this point that seems to be of no return. When I started teaching about this at Columbia 20 years ago, I remember I used the term Zionism, and I had one of my students who had just come back from their birthright trip or whatever say to me, "Oh, no one says Zionism anymore. That's not a word we use." And I said, well, "What do you mean?" And I realized that they'd kind of drummed it out of Israeli culture, sort of an embarrassment, that term. And one of the things that's been great to see in the last few months is that term come roaring back, and lots of people not just use it, but then embrace the term and call themselves anti-Zionist. And I mean,
Right.
like normie middle, like housewives who watch MSNBC are calling themselves anti-Zionist now and have watermelons in their Twitter profile. That is what I think is the existential crisis, isn't it? Once Americans stop supporting this project, I don't see how Israel can survive for very long. So isn't the main war here among Americans?
It is.
Yeah.
But I mean, the future of the Democratic Party base does not support it, but the Democratic Party is undemocratic. So, I mean, what's happening now is not progress in a concrete way. We're not able to actually change the Biden administration's calculus enough to prevent genocide in the near term. Although I do think over time, their calculus has been shifted by public pressure and international pressure.
Yeah.
But we've exposed international institutions, everything like the ICC to the UN Security Council to the Democratic Party itself and Congress as completely hollow, hypocritical, and useless when it comes to stopping what every international legal expert has been trained for in recognizing as a genocide. So it's an achievement, but it highlights the sort of hollowness and phoniness of Western liberal democracy at this point. And it shows also how much the European Union is a poodle of the United States and
Oh,
of powerful interests like the Israel lobby. And this has all happened. I mean, I think what exposes it so much is that this isn't the first mass slaughter of Palestinians. It's not the first one I've covered or followed closely. Back in 2014, this was happening, but it was happening under Obama, and it was Samantha Power who would get up and declare that Hamas has broken this ceasefire and Israel had a right to bombard the refugee camp in Rafah and kill 100 people. Hamas, these were much more convincing liberal figures selling the industrial level slaughter of Palestinians back in 2014. Back in, I don't know, 2009, when Netanyahu came into power, that's when I, really woke up and really started to wave my anti-Zionist freak flag. That's when I started the work on Goliath, which didn't come out till 2013.
Hmm.
And I recognized that Israel had passed through a transitional phase and that
Mm-hmm.
the era of labor Zionism was over. It was now a not just a Likud state, but a religious nationalist messianic camp was taking over, and they controlled the hearts and minds of Jewish Israeli youth, and it was never going to change. And that was going to have serious implications for Palestinians, but basically for Americans and the American intelligentsia. Once you recognize that that's Israel's future, there's no way that you can be a liberal Zionist. You have to
Right.
either be an anti-Zionist or a Zionist.
Right.
It's pretty black and white, because the liberal Zionist camp, which carried out the Nakba, the systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1948, carried out heinous massacres under the cover of the 1956 war, including in Gaza, when hundreds of men were lined up against a wall and shot, summarily executed. The um, uh, I'll come back to it. In the Galilee, there was a massacre
Mm-hmm.
of Palestinians coming back to their fields. It was all covered up by David Ben-Gurion. He established a closed military zone around Kfar Qassam, and tried to cover it up. And then the authors of the massacre were all promoted, and one of them was actually given a position in charge of security at the secret Dimona nuclear site. This is all under the guise of labor, liberal Zionism. 1967, liberal Zionism.
Hmm.
Levi Eshkol, maybe one of the
Mm-hmm.
most liberal Israeli prime ministers, was in charge at
Mm-hmm.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the liberals, Natan Alterman, the poet of the most famous poet laureate of liberal Zionism, he went to Hebron and said that his heart sang, and that he was so overwhelmed with these new possibilities for settlement near the Jewish Holy Land. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
how liberal Zionists always responded to the
Mm-hmm.
occupation. Shimon Peres, he went to an area apartment settlers had occupied in the West Bank, and just said, you know what, you guys have a lot of enthusiasm for Zionism. We're going to just let you have it, even though it was illegal. And again, they presided over the worst slaughters of Palestinians during the Second Intifada. Ehud Barak,
Mm-hmm.
Rabin's successor, he was responsible for all the worst war crimes. He was always involved in a major government position, defense minister, prime minister, between 1999 and 2009, when the body count of Palestinians increased exponentially. And remember the 2006 assault on southern Lebanon and southern Beirut,
Mm-hmm.
the birth pangs of a new Middle East, according to Condoleezza Rice. In other words, a pilot program for the war on Iran that was carried out under Ehud Barak's watch, and Ehud Olmert, who also came from kind of the center left. So and then you have all these phony liberal left Zionist authors, David Grossman, Amos Oz. They would
Mm-hmm.
command so much respect among the liberal intelligentsia, or the liberal left intelligentsia in New York.
That's it.
The Eric Altermans and the New York Review of Books crowd would just worship these guys. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever they would say, well, we have to be gentle to Israel. I actually interviewed David Grossman in Jerusalem back in like 2010, and he was like, you have to be nice to Israel. You have to understand that we're traumatized. You can't withhold aid. You can't sanction us. Please do not boycott us. But we are but then he'd have this harsh critique of the leadership in the military. And
Right.
so that was their role, and nobody cares about them anymore. Nobody at the Nation knows who they are. They're not really, they're old school. That whole world of liberal left Zionism has been extinguished. So the mask is off right now. And Israel, also used to invest. This is going back to your original question. Israel used to invest so much money in denying obvious war crimes and assassinations and executions. Remember Mohammed al-Dura during the Second Intifada? This is like going back to 2001. He was a boy who was shot while his father tried to protect him in a sort of
Oh yeah.
crossfire
Mm-hmm.
incident.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's symbolized for Palestinians their powerlessness, a father being rendered powerless to save his child. And it really spoke to them and to the world. A French cameraman named Charles Anderlin. I don't remember much French, but his name is Charles Enderlin, filmed it. He feels very confident that what he saw was, the kid being targeted, a horrible war crime. He's on Twitter. You can interact with him. And Israel spent millions of dollars coming up with alternate scenarios. It felt like it created entire entities that still exist, like camera and all these media monitoring organizations to attack the media if they described it as a killing. Now they're just freely killing children, posting it on Instagram, showing themselves burning UN schools. They're proudly broadcasting their crimes. They're a video surfaced last week of Israeli soldiers in a wing of the medical school at Islamic University, dancing around with Torahs and Israeli flags, and then they proceeded to burn the entire wing. So it's all out there. There's no liberal left voice in government. Actually, the old head of the Meretz party, Amir Golan, who was an Israeli army veteran, the Meretz party being Israel's version of the Green Party, he is one of the biggest supporters of genocide in Israel right now, and he's gaining popularity.
Wow.
So it's all gone. You have the biggest protests I've ever seen protesting this war in US cities across the world. Indonesia had close to 1 million people in Jakarta protesting yesterday.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the international institutions won't budge. The Democratic Party and the Biden administration, his numbers are tumbling, and he won't budge. They won't budge. It exposes how unresponsive they are to the reality that they claim to uphold in a rules-based order.
Yeah. About Israel's isolation, I might be differing with you on one point, but you could be right about this. The ICJ ruling, which essentially says Israel's committing genocide, isn't that and there's other pieces of evidence big over the last 4 months that the EU countries are moving away from Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, Spain came out with a really strong statement with Belgium a couple months ago against Israel. But the ICJ, as I understand it, the politics of it, it sort of represents the EU more or less, right? It's kind of the EU's body, I think, more or less. And so to me, that's what it said. And then the UK amazingly abstained in that last vote in the UN, which also said a lot to me. Are they not? It seems to me the EU is falling away. No?
Well, I would have expected them to fall away some time ago when it became clear that this military operation in Gaza was not about retaliating for October 7th. It was about a longer term objective of ethnic cleansing. But leaving that aside, the ICJ is while it's connected to the UN, differs from the ICC. It's more reflective of a true multilateral institution in the global South. One of the judges who apparently was bought off by Israel, who's actually been renounced by her own country, surprisingly came from Uganda, or her government denounced her.
Yeah.
So there, the ICJ is different from the ICC, and its rulings go to the World Court. The ICC is right now under the control, essentially, of British intelligence through Karim Khan.
Oh.
He seems to have been bought he's the chief prosecutor. He seems to have been bought by the UK. I wrote several pieces exposing him as just a tool of the British, which makes him a tool of the US. He has rejected or basically, how should I put it? He's basically dustbinned his predecessor's mandate to investigate war crimes against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip going back to 2014. And then after October 7th, he had previously vowed to go to Palestine and investigate. And instead, he went into Jerusalem and I think Tel Aviv and met with Jewish Israeli families who had their family members either abducted into Gaza or killed, exclusively met with them. This is the same guy who indicted Vladimir Putin for actually evacuating some 16,000 ethnically Russian children, Russian-speaking children from the war zone in the Donbass, where Ukraine is killing them, arresting their parents, disappearing their parents. So it's obvious who controls the ICC, and that institution has been completely exposed. But the ICJ, yes, they issued a somewhat watered down ruling that still creates the context for, first of all, imposing a ceasefire through implementing its recommendations, and has mainstreamed the language of genocide, the idea that Israel's committing genocide. And I mean, if our leadership in the US is going to accuse Russia and China of genocide without really accusing them of any systematic mass killing of civilians, then how is Israel not guilty? I think more people in the West are coming to that realization.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't think that most people in Israel, and I think pro-Israel supporters even in America, don't get how much they are hated. I mean, I went from
Yeah.
being, as I said, like a non-Zionist, like, I don't like this thing over there. I don't want to support it, but I don't, I wasn't sort of actively angry about Israel. I mean, I hate that fucking thing, and I want it to go now. I mean, and I know that I'm one of millions and millions of people who maybe didn't even know about Israel before October 7th. I mean, there were 1 million people in the streets of London. There were hundreds of thousands of people in every city in the country, in the United States. It's a bigger movement, I think, than the anti-Vietnam War movement. People,
Yeah.
when they see trapped children getting bombed all day, get very upset no matter what the politics of it are. So I want to talk with you about the Palestinian resistance, the least understood thing in the whole world, probably. And you've spent a lot of time there, and I had Dan Cohen on the show a couple months ago, and we talked about how you guys actually, well, and then you can see the footage in Killing Gaza. Actually, you were with not the Qassam brigades, but one of the smaller militant groups, doing their training, I think. So one thing is, right, Sam Harris just issued a podcast, which you must run out and listen to because you'll learn a lot
Oh man.
about Israel from it. He exposes 5 myths about Israel, but it's
Oh
really
my
just,
God.
but yeah, no, you'll learn a lot
He's a
about it.
Jewish Zionist, by the way. I mean, that the thing about these atheists, Bill Maher,
Of
Sam
course he is.
Harris, so many of them are Jewish Zionists who
Well,
are involved in cultism, with Sam Bankman-Fried, bizarre philanthrop, rich people cultism,
yeah.
and probably strange sexual practices for all I know. But they never, they're just using it all as a cover for their Zionism.
I mean, I don't really care one way or the other, but I actually get the feeling that Sam is primarily motivated not by a love for Israel, but by hatred of Muslims.
Hatred of Muslims. Yeah.
That's really why and I actually think that's why he's a Zionist, because it's a way to kill Muslims, get rid of them. But
No,
so
I think sorry to keep cutting in, but
yeah,
these
please.
people, one of the reasons they're considered thought leaders is because they're transcendent and they rise above all of the atavistic primal tendencies of the masses. They're atheists and they're able to think through complex ideas because they're not prone to the same guttural, visceral, reflexive instincts of people who adhere to a folk religion and have such a deep connection to their ancestors. They're kind of like a new man. That's how they present themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Or like Bill Maher, he's just this freewheeling guy in Hollywood who doesn't care what anybody else thinks. He's politically incorrect. But
Yeah.
the reality is, they're still bar mitzvah boys who are
Mm,
brainwashed and would love
mm,
to be on a birthright trip and
mhm.
have a childlike, low IQ understanding of what Israel actually is, and it all goes back to their own uh, their own indoctrination and their religion. They are religious, and
Sure,
I say I don't say that because the Jews are all Zionists. I say Zionism has actually become a religion unto itself.
sure, sure. Yeah, so Sam
But
Harris
you want
is,
to talk about the Mukawama? You want to talk about the resistance? Like,
well, let's get there.
you
No,
go
I
to
was talking
that.
about Sam Harris. No, I want to do this first. Like, this is a lead into that. So his theory of the resistance, and it's, very knowledgeable, and he spent tons of time in the field gleaning this information. It's the argument he's been making for 25 years, which is that Islam is the problem, jihad in particular is the problem, It is a set of terrible, horrific, irrational, barbaric ideas that are, his words, deranged, crazy, maniacal, etc. And we simply have to get Muslims across the world, 2 billion Muslims, to change their mind about this and to reject it and renounce it. That's the problem. That's why Hamas did October 7th. That's why they blew up children in the Second Intifada. That's why all the bad things have happened. So now, he'll say, this is a culture in Palestine of martyrdom, a culture of death. And, I've seen some videos of some Palestinian, even women, even mothers, saying things, not a lot, but I've seen some videos of them saying things that sort of sound like that. They're proud of their son, who is now a martyr. I've noticed that in Palestine, it seems like you can't really mention someone who's been killed without calling them a martyr. You sort of have no choice in that. You're kind of automatically made into a martyr, no
Yeah.
matter whether you're
Like if
political or not.
if American soldiers were actually defending their country, their parents would call them fallen heroes.
And
It's the
they'd be in
same.
Arlington Cemetery with giant celebrations all the time. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, is that what you want to say about it? Like, is it? I really not sure about this. Because I haven't been there. But I mean, is it a unique culture of martyrdom? And if so, might we have some explanation for that? Like,
Well, you don't see a lot. Actually, what you see, you can go see what they're doing, what the military wing of Hamas or the military wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad is doing right now in the
mm,
field,
mm,
and it's not martyrdom.
mm,
Uh,
right.
you can see it. Just follow them on Telegram. Uh, you can find their videos on Twitter. They're recording their operations in the field, and they're carrying out precise military style operations against heavily armored Israeli soldiers in tanks, bulldozers. They're even attempting to take down helicopters. They use something called the Shawaz bomb, which is often repurposed Israeli 2,000-pound, 500-pound missiles that have fallen and failed to explode in densely populated areas. And they pack it into a kind of barrel bomb. And you'll see a young man run up to a tank, a Merkava tank, at its
Mm-hmm.
weakest point, which is the back area where soldiers dismount, place it there, and then run away to safety. He's not a suicide bomber. He's
Mm-hmm.
not a guy who's possessed with, Islamic insanity to kill himself. He wants to actually live through that operation, and he's carrying out something out because there are actual orders and directions, and they're having a lot of success in the field. If they were just a bunch of crazy suicide bombers running around with Shaheed clothes, they wouldn't be killing so many Israeli soldiers. And if they just wanted to kill Jews for the sake of killing Jews, then why did they take so many hostages? Why didn't they just kill them all and rape them all? I mean, we keep hearing about rape. Why do all these female hostages keep coming out of there and none of them can
Right.
attest to sexual abuse? One former hostage said she felt abused because her captor looked at her but did not rape her. She's actually quoted in Israeli media saying that. But that's why was I not killed in the Gaza Strip if they just want to kill Jews
Yeah.
because they're in a religious war?
Yeah.
My
I
name's
mean,
Blumenthal. When I checked into my apartment that I had rented, a temporary stay apartment in Gaza City, I had to give my name to the manager, and that goes straight to the interior ministry in Gaza, which is the Hamas run interior ministry.
mm-hmm.
Blumenthal, do you think they're stupid? And my roommates were Cohen and Rosenfeld. It was like basically like we were a law firm in the middle of Gaza City. They
I
could have,
mean, yeah.
and they don't care. Ramadan Shalah, the longtime head of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, explicitly has said, I have no problem living with Jews. The problem is living with an exclusively Jewish state, which declares that we are a demographic threat and we have no place in it. Same thing with Ahmed Yassin, the founder of Hamas, said, I grew up with Jews before the founding of the state of Israel. But once they
Mm,
declared a Jews only state, they started to force us out. And that's our problem.
mm,
It's the same analysis that like anyone would have uh, with any rational sense, is that Zionism means Jews from everywhere around the world can come to anywhere Israel controls, including Palestinian areas that are technically Palestine in 67 territory.
mm-hmm.
And now they're holding conferences and basically gigantic mass parties in Jerusalem calling for the resettlement of Gaza, something that 4 in 10 Jewish Israelis support, according to a recent poll. That's what Zionism means. It also means that Palestinians have no right to be anywhere in historic Palestine. And so Gaza is, for Palestinians there, they understand it to be a temporary human warehouse because they cannot return to the land they're pushed out on. So they have always had armed resistance ever since 1948 and prior. They had volunteer units that fought in 48. They were sold out by the Arab states then. Gamal Abdel Nasser supported them from 48 till the late 50s. They suffered heavy attacks under the administration of Ben Gurion. Throughout the 60s, they were, essentially powerless. They were also subjected to massacres. After 67, they were formally occupied. Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, oversaw brutal operations. And that's when armed resistance started to really return to places like the Al Bureij camp, Jabalia refugee camp. It was really the refugee camps that became the basis, because these are people who have so much less to lose. And it was secular resistance at that time, being organized by the Palestinian Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was officially Marxist-Leninist. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine was much stronger then, also a socialist Marxist party. These were both supported by the Soviet Union and by Syria. And they had arms within the refugee camps in Beirut. And ultimately, they made after the Iranian Revolution, they were supported there. But the resistance in Palestine, the armed resistance, always started out as secular.
Yeah.
And it was mostly crushed because of the Oslo Accords. Yeah. Because all the secular parties signed on to normalize with Israel, got completely screwed over. And here you have Hamas, which had been organizing all along through their social services. And they were providing people with aid and schooling, kind of sub rosa, under the radar. In Gaza, the Israeli Shin Bet was allowing them to organize more because they saw them as a counterweight to the secular Fatah and PFLP, which they at the time judged to be a greater threat. And the Palestinian population all across the diaspora sees Oslo as this completely corrupt deal. And then they see the corruption take hold in Ramallah as all this money gets pumped into the 5-star gilded occupation base. Arafat's killed. There's almost nothing left in his wake. And Hamas really leads the Second Intifada, along with just desperate youth who've had their homes destroyed, their families killed. And this isn't well understood. Hamas actually extracted material, concrete concessions from Israel through its campaign of violence during the Second Intifada, which was a response to much more overwhelming violence by the Israelis. They extracted the Gaza withdrawal, the withdrawal of all Israeli settlers from the Gaza Strip, which, mainly 9,000 fanatics but the presence of the settlers in the Gaza Strip would lead to constant curfews. People were unable to travel from north to south. They often took up like 30% of the water supply. They required sometimes tens of thousands of troops just to protect them and keep their presence there, which led to heinous violence. And so their removal was like one of the first kind of liberatory moments for Palestinians, but then they were promptly placed under siege. And that has led us to the present situation where under siege, Palestinians were able to form basically a military, like a real military, which they haven't been able to do in the West Bank, where all resistance in 2005, 2006 was completely pacified through the Dayton Plan. American and British mercenaries came in and trained the Palestinian Authority to serve as an occupation subcontractor, further discrediting Fatah, the sort of secular wing. And all along, the Islamist vision of Hamas grew in popularity, but it grew in popularity not because there's something that is just deeply embedded in Islam that's anti-Jewish and they just want to kill Jews. It's because they embraced resistance. The city of Qalqilia, for example, in Palestinian national elections in 06, voted for Hamas. And this is a city in the West Bank. Actually, Hamas did better in the West Bank than they did in the Gaza Strip. Why? Because Israel built its apartheid wall completely around the city of Qalqilia. And people said, well, how did this happen? Our leadership here didn't do anything. So we're going to vote for the guys who are taking up the guns that actually got the settlers out of Gaza. That's all it's about. I mean, and Islam is also a factor, though. Because when you have, and this is true also in a lot, especially in Shia communities, it's true in southern Lebanon. When you have military, you're up against a military that has advanced weapons, not just advanced weapons, some of the most advanced weapons in human history. They seem to have an endless supply of explosives to blow up your neighborhood, your city. They destroyed Gaza City in about a month and a half. You're up and they don't care about killing you. In fact, their doctrine is to kill you, the civilian, in order to place pressure on the leadership and the military that they can't destroy. This is called the Dahiya doctrine. It was conceived based on Israel's destruction of the southern Beirut neighborhood of Dahiya in 2006 by then Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot, who, by the way, is considered a centrist or even a center-left figure who might replace Netanyahu today in Israeli politics.
And he's lost.
And
he's lost one son, right? In Gaza, he's lost one son or two.
A son and a nephew.
Son and nephew, yeah.
Eisenkot conceived this, and he said the idea is we will, any town or city in which attacks are launched from, we will destroy the town or the city. Any neighborhood, we will destroy the entire neighborhood. So it's a doctrine of disproportionate force. They actually had a professor from Tel Aviv University named Asa Kasher, who's sort of considered an ethicist, create this ethical model for justifying the Dahiya doctrine. And it's kind of, it's loosely referred to as the neighbor policy, where if there's a terrorist, his neighbor is not a civilian. His neighbor is the terrorist's non-dangerous neighbor, and therefore, under Israel's reinterpretation of international law, you can kill the neighbor as well, which is why Israel came in to supposedly get one Hamas operative in the Jabalia camp back in, I guess it was October, dropped 2,000-pound bombs on one of the most densely populated areas in the world, killed 200 people. That's according to not just sort of a military strategy, but an ethical principle that Israel has conceived over the years. So when that's what you're up against, there's really psychologically only one way to withstand it, and it's to accept the reality of death on your path to liberation. Otherwise, you have to just give up and look at what happened to, although they fought, the American Indian, for example.
Right.
Look at what happened to people who were defeated by settler colonial foes, and they're not willing to do that. So Islam does play a real role in resisting the Dahiya doctrine. And, you know, I've seen video of, for example, I'll just refer to two videos that will help illustrate the points I'm making to counter Sam Harris's sort of like sub-Wikipedia level Zionism for idiots. A man walked into a mortuary, was filmed in a mortuary in Gaza City earlier during this war. And they said, what are you doing here? And he said, this is my brother. And it was a man in a body bag. And he said, you know, I believe in God. Everything is in the hands of Islam. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to be sad. That's the way it is. And, you know, God will deliver us, essentially. And he was basically like, I'm not going to allow the Israelis to see me be humiliated by this. And the only thing I have to turn to is my God and my religion. And the whole point of the Dahiya doctrine is humiliation and to break the psychological will of Palestinians through just mass slaughter, to say, hey, we will keep killing you until you stop. We're not afraid. We don't care. And the US is going to give us weapons and there's nothing you can do. And he's saying, no, you can't break me. And then there was a video that came out today of fighting in the Maghazi camp in Gaza,
Hmm.
released by the Al-Qassam brigades, highlights of them hitting Israeli tanks with locally made weapons. And one man is running up to fire a Yassin tandem charge. It's basically an anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade made locally in Gaza at a tank, and he said, this is for my family. This is revenge for my family, inshallah. So his family was killed by Israel, and that's who's fighting, and that's why they fight. It's very human what's happening there, and it's what we would do if a foreign force was coming to slaughter our families. It's what every red-blooded conservative American would do, and if they can't respect that simply because they've so dehumanized Arabs and Muslims and been so propagandized that they can't see that what they're doing is basically like what the fictional characters in Red Dawn were doing
Just
under
gonna
a
say.
Soviet
I
invasion.
was just gonna say, yeah. Wolverines. Yeah, that they
Yeah.
should be able to identify. Yeah. So yeah, speaking of dehumanization, let's finish by talking about October 7th. Because this is what, your work's been mostly about lately, and it's been the most incendiary stuff, and I can't imagine the heat you've gotten over this, being the world's leading rape denialist now. I mean, and anti-Semitic, Hamas supporting rape denialist. Um, so yeah, you've been arguing, for those who don't know. I mean, you've been not arguing, you've been showing with evidence that there is no evidence. There simply is no evidence to this date of any rape at all, much less mass rape, and there's also no evidence of any of the beheaded babies that were claimed, or the burned families that were claimed, or the baby burned in an oven, which John Podhoretz tweeted in all caps 10 times in a row. He blocked me a while ago, so I saw this in a screenshot. Yeah. Um, yeah, he just knew for sure that a baby had been baked in an oven. He knew that they had done that. There was no question in his mind. And
Well, he wanted it to be true, actually.
of course, yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah. So then, I mean, the most stunning thing lately is that the New York Times, I guess was in December, is that when they ran that big story about the playing catch with the breasts and the stabbing women while they're being raped, and multiple rapes simultaneously, and stabbing a woman while she's being
yeah,
raped every time she's
it's like the
penetrated.
aristocrat. It's like the Hamas version of the Aristocrats or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like a joke of a
The
horror movie.
Aristocrats.
Yeah, I mean,
Like who came up with that?
I had friends who were like screenshotting that article and saying, "See, all you rape denialist Hamas supporters, see, now do you feel bad, don't you?" I was like, these are very smart people, by the way. These are like very good people I normally totally respect and have a lot of holy smoke. So now it comes out, I guess just a few days ago, right, that there's been massive infighting within the New York Times about this, and many, many staff in the New York Times, which is just amazing. I used to work in that building.
Really?
Yeah, I worked for the magazine when I was in grad school. The so and it sounds like a huge portion of the New York Times staff does not believe this shit. And they don't ever name you, right? Because that would be to name the devil, but it's obvious who they're talking about. And it's not just there, it's in Haaretz, it's in many other big prominent mainstream sources, newspapers and outlets, where they're basically mentioning you in the Grayzone indirectly for this. And Um, so let's talk about this, because the politics of what you've been doing on this is so tricky, right? It's like, because you've said this, and I know this, and we all, there absolutely were, by anybody's standards, atrocities committed by Hamas militants, by Qassam fighters on October 7th. I've seen the videos. There's one in particular which no one talks about. It's a guy with a Qassam headband, so I'm assuming it's one of them, chasing down three young women. That's too far away to tell exactly. I don't think they were dressed in military outfits. It was on one of the kibbutz that was in between the two major kibbutzim that were attacked. And he just runs after them and then shoots them casually in the head. Didn't bother to do anything else, but it was almost sort of breathtakingly brutal.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
there were deliberate executions and many of them were of Israeli soldiers, including many female Israeli soldiers. And there are a lot of videos showing
Well,
female soldiers trying to hide under desks, and they're executed. The orders were to wipe out the Gaza division, which was enforcing the siege. And so,
right. So I want to get to this,
but
right? So
I'm not denying that they
no, I
killed
want to, yeah.
civilians.
So we're going to get to that because that's a different matter. I mean, it's a different matter. Everybody agrees killing soldiers on October 7th is simply a different matter. And most people would consider that completely justified or legitimate and not a war crime. So now Israel's been radically reducing its number of civilian deaths since October 7th. First it was 1,400, then it was 1,200, and now the latest, is it not 695, they say, civilians were killed? Is that right? Okay, so um, originally we were told nonstop, around the clock, by everybody on the pro-Israel side, from Netanyahu on down, that they raped all the women, they beheaded all the babies, and they killed 1,400 of our people. But the 1,400 actually was always secondary. It was almost always just beheaded babies, rape, beheaded babies, rape. Now we know there was no beheaded babies, no rape, and it was 695, half as many civilians as we thought before. And this is according to them. Of those 695, how many do you suspect were killed by Israeli tanks and Apache gunships?
Great question. I mean, the Grayzone was attacked in the Washington Post last week for stating that most Israeli civilians were killed by Israeli tanks and helicopters, except we never said that.
Right.
They just made that up.
Right.
We only pointed to specific incidents, and there are many where that happened, and we have been proven more correct than we ever knew we were by Israeli media investigations, where they have more access to Israeli military leadership. So some of the most, I mean, I've had to dig into all of this, working with others, and some of the most, it's for me, I'm not in the field, I'm not on the front lines, but I had to, for example, read about the deaths of so many Jewish Israelis on October 7th, especially teenagers or entire families, and examine the circumstances of their deaths to determine whether it would have been even possible for Hamas militants to have executed them.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been kind of traumatizing to learn their identities, to learn, for example, the Sharabi family, a mother and two 13-year-old and 16-year-old daughter killed in an embrace, burned so badly that only they could only be identified by their DNA and their teeth. And I think the father may have been kidnapped, I'm not sure. But just to think about that and have to look at photos of it and look at photos of them before it, like, my sympathy isn't just for Palestinians because they're Palestinians. This is horrible too. Who could have done that to them? There is the possibility that they were burned alive while in an embrace by Hamas militants, but it doesn't quite add up.
Right.
Why were they in an embrace? It seems like something that you would do to protect your child when there's a major explosion. They were in Kibbutz Be'eri, where tanks were operating, Merkava tanks were sent in, and they were given orders, specific orders, we now know, to fire on homes that contained Hamas militants, even if it was known that many Israeli hostages were inside. So you can go ahead and blame Hamas for creating the context of the whole thing. I think there's some legitimacy to that, but I would also say, why were those? I mean, you could also blame Zionism for putting those people there as a human wall on the other side of a de facto concentration camp or prison camp.
Right.
But the tanks were firing on homes. We now have video of them firing on homes. We have video and we have testimony by two of the only survivors of one of these attacks. One of them, whose name is Yasmin Porat, in the home of a family named Pessi Cohen, where the tanks were ordered to fire 2 shells into a home in which close to a dozen Israelis were laying on the ground out front, and several were inside, including 2 children, the Hetzroni twins. and there were something like allegedly 30 Hamas gunmen inside, and they killed everybody. Everybody died, and they did it knowing that there were Jewish Israelis there, and then they lied about it. Then this testimony comes out in Israeli media. But you look at all the homes in Kibbutz Be'eri, this is basically the new Yad Vashem. They're like making it out to be the next Holocaust museum. They take every high profile visitor there, and even like low profile wash-ups like Michael Rappaport get to go there. But they took like Jared and Ivanka there. I think they took Elon Musk there. And they never like question why the homes are completely destroyed and how Hamas, with coming in with just the arms they could carry on their backs, maybe on Chinese-made motorcycles, was able to do that much damage. And the fact is that helicopters, Apache helicopters and tanks were operating in Kibbutz Be'eri with orders to take everything out. And now we know that at least 70 cars were destroyed by Israeli helicopters on the way out of the Nova Electronic Music Festival, where most of I think the most civilians or non-combatants were killed on October 7th. We know that through Ynet, Yediot Aharonot, the most popular newspaper in Israel, and Ronen Bergman, one of the top security correspondents whose last book was blurbed by every former Mossad and Shin Bet chief. That's how he knows that. So they're coming out and saying it. The Israeli media, the Haaretz, is calling for investigations into friendly fire killings. I can just go on the snuff pages that the Israeli Prime Minister's office has put up, Netanyahu's office, about October 7th. And I found images showing friendly fire deaths, clearly showing friendly fire deaths. There's one where you can see an old man with his hands bound in the passenger seat, who's in his shorts and t-shirt. He was obviously kidnapped, and a militant at the driver's wheel, and they're both dead with Israeli soldiers around them. So they killed the hostage in order to prevent the militant from getting back according to orders that they were given. This is the Hannibal Directive.
Right.
And it was mass Hannibal. The Hannibal Directive is once secret Israeli directive that allows the military to neutralize not only the captor, but the captive in order to prevent a major prisoner swap. And we haven't even gotten into the politics of the prisoner swaps right now. The only thing I'd say in the time we have is the Hannibal Directive is continuing as we speak. The Israeli military is freely killing Israeli captives in the Gaza Strip. It's been documented that they've not only, killed them in airstrikes, but they've executed them at point blank range in the field,
right,
while they were waving white flags. And the families of these captives
right,
are going on Israeli media and saying, you are killing our families deliberately, Netanyahu. Why don't you do a deal? Why don't you do a prisoner swap? And it's because prisoner swap strengthens Hamas in their view, and the hostages give Hamas leverage. So if you eliminate all the hostages, you eliminate the leverage for Hamas, and there's an entire incipient growing political camp in Israel, the Jewish nationalists that are most well represented in the governing coalition, that only wants to exterminate as many Palestinians as possible in Gaza, resettle the Gaza Strip, and scatter Palestinians like seeds into the wind. They don't want the hostages to live, because that would mean that they couldn't do that. The two are mutually exclusive.
right.
So it all started on October 7th with the deliberate targeting through friendly fire orders of Israeli captives, and it continues today. And it's all out in the open. We have been vindicated, and the Israeli media knows we have. The Israeli media that was attacking us in October for saying this, but they've kind of like ceded ground there in a big way. And they've also ceded ground on all the fake atrocities, like the beheaded babies, the baby baked in an oven. Channel 13, one of the major networks in Israel, had a round table discussion, which you may have seen, where Mickey Rosenfeld, who's a former Israeli member of Knesset from Labor, said, these lurid atrocities were fabricated in order to magnify the evil of Hamas in the beginning.
An admission.
And they openly acknowledged it. and said, well, but then they kind of caveated and said, well, the reason that we have to talk about this is because people are denying that October 7th happened at all, and we have to show that some of this wasn't true. And
Right.
but it's too late. It's too late. They
Yeah.
lied, and most Jewish Israelis believe all the lies, and that's what part of the reason that these lies were deployed was to mobilize them to carry out the actual atrocities we see in the Gaza Strip that
Exactly.
resemble beheading babies, killing people willy-nilly in execution style, burning homes. Haaretz has a piece up today telling us what we already knew, but we're like, well, it's confirmed. It's Israelis saying it. That Israel has a deliberate policy of burning homes in the northern Gaza Strip to prevent people from being able to return.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, it was very obvious, but it's amazing when I try to tell people this, they still sort of almost laugh at me. So if it had been 1,400 civilians killed in a few hours, and they were systematically raping women and beheading babies, then, a very serious campaign of mass military slaughter, might be justified. If those people are really that insane and irrational and barbaric, then okay, I get it. And that's what millions of people did get, because that's what they were told over and over again. It was the justification for a genocidal type campaign, not a regular military response. But what you've done, I think, is shown, because now you can account for at least maybe 100 people who were killed, most likely by Israelis. So now we're down to 500 or 600 civilians, maybe. And I bet you some of them were military anyway, or recent military, since everybody's in the military in Israel. 500, none of the atrocities. That now looks like a more or less ordinary military campaign that Hamas undertook, that most militaries would have, with the same number of civilian casualties and collateral damage, which is what we call it. Anytime we've invaded a country or had some major operation in some other country, that's what happens. A bunch of civilians get killed, and probably
Well,
some women.
The
Yeah,
Israeli police had conducted an investigation and determined that Hamas didn't even know about the Nova Electronic Music Festival,
right,
and did not deliberately target it.
right.
I mean, the other component here is that basically by breaking open this $1 billion prison wall that has been erected around Gaza, many people flowed into southern Israel who had
Yeah,
nothing to do with Hamas, or
yeah,
some of them may have, these are desperately poor people.
yeah,
So some of them wanted to loot.
yeah,
Some of them wanted to get revenge on Israel for killing their families and just carry out mayhem. There
yeah,
was a scene of a guy who was not affiliated, just a common kind of maniac, killing a Thai indentured servant guest worker on a kibbutz with a shovel, which was probably one of the most horrible documented crimes on October 7th. And, some of these witnesses who have been kind of discredited didn't even blame Hamas for the crazy gang rapes they said they witnessed, and said it was common people who had come in.
yeah,
Many people came in to take pictures, and they thought, oh, wow, I can see where my grandparents are from. And many of them were killed by Israeli helicopters. And those deaths were actually counted among the deaths of
oh
the
yeah, right,
total of 1,400 deaths of Israelis, which was the original official death toll.
right, right, right.
So, I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
there needs to be an investigation into October 7th, an independent, even within Israel, an independent one. Uh, we did our best to conduct, using public records and any other evidence we could gather, kind of an initial investigation. And we never really denied that, some atrocities might have happened, but the Israelis shot so far, and the US media proved to be such stenographers for them,
hmm,
that it just blew up in their faces. And now the New York Times has pulled its daily episode on Hamas mass rape because of our work and the work of other independent outlets. And Jeffrey Gettleman, the author of this piece, has had to issue this kind of quasi defense of his own reporting, which was completely sleazy, where basically it was framed around the news of a UN investigation coming to investigate mass rape on October 7th. So they're basically investigating a baseless allegation because that's how much power Israel holds. And they rejected initially another UN investigation on the grounds that it would be anti-Semitic because it was the UN's Gender Commission, which they just said that's an anti-Semitic commission. So Gettleman frames his piece around that, and then he goes back not only to his witnesses to try to get them to say, yeah, I was telling you the truth, and one of them changed her story again, and the other one refused to talk to him. He went to the sister of Exhibit A, the girl in the black dress, who was obviously either killed by a Hamas RPG or by an Israeli Hellfire missile and had rigor mortis. Her head was all burned. Her car was destroyed. She was lying outside her car with a black dress on. And because her dress was kind of hiked up and she was wearing a, small, dress, she was scantily clad coming from a music festival, he just echoed the popular Israeli determination that she had been raped without evidence. And her sister comes out and says, that's totally not true. It's impossible that she would have been raped. You manipulated us into participating in this article. And he actually called the sister and tried to kind of bully her into backing down. That's, a journalist going to a bereaved family member who's traumatized and also under enormous social pressure in this kind of hermetic, ultra ethno-nationalist society, and getting her to kind of recant what she said on social media in order to protect his own journalistic reputation. That just adds to this scandal. So I think what we're seeing here, just from the point of view of just looking at the New York Times or the Guardian, which ran its own kind of copy and pasted version of the New York Times article, which actually wound up plagiarizing an NBC article on Hamas mass rape because it turns out they all were just getting the same witnesses furnished to them by the Israeli government and probably the same kind of documents laying out the quote unquote evidence. This is like a gigantic media scandal. I think it's a bigger scandal than Caliphate. I know you had the author of Caliphate at the festival you hosted this summer. Rukmini Kalamaki.
That's right.
And she's still on. I think she's still employed by the New York Times after doing one of the most popular recent news related podcasts, and her source for the entire thing turning out to be a fraud. I think we have a bigger scandal on our hands because it's not just confined to one media outlet. It's the entire media. It's like Iraq WMD, but they're never going to get punished because we are seen as defending the reputation of Hamas, and that's just not allowed.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. You're always against that headwind. What are the plans for the Grayzone coming up? What are you all doing? Is Jeremy Lafredo still there in Israel?
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Jeremy's going, we're hoping that he can go back, and I think provide all of our audience with a more intimate and honest view of the political and social crisis in Israeli society around the issue of the captives and the perspective of Palestinians on their own captives, on the prisoners. So yeah, we're hoping to do that next month. And, we're just going to continue doing what we're doing. I mean, we're working on a piece about the last issue we just discussed. And I think it's important, at the Grayzone, not only to do live streams or video. We were working with local journalists in Gaza also to bring a more unvarnished perspective from Gaza than you're going to get with mainstream media, and something that's more narrative than just seeing a clip here of this atrocity. Interviewing, we interview people. Like, I communicate with the journalists and say, we'd like to ask these questions. So we're hoping to publish some interviews soon of women who were taken captive by the Israeli military and just released.
Oh, wow.
But we also really want to keep a record. And I think whether it goes viral or not, whether we do have like very heavy readership, we're doing something that a lot of independent outlets are moving away from, or alternative outlets, which is just, straight up print journalism, investigative journalism.
Yep.
creating a record.
Yep.
And, in the
Yep.
case of some of these articles, we've done investigations on October 7th. We're getting them translated into Hebrew because we think one of the most important things is to deprogram,
Yeah.
de-radicalize the Jewish Israeli public.
Yeah.
That's I should say that, I work with Israeli and ex-Israeli researchers on a lot of this material, and they're heroes.
Totally. That's all essential work. I'm so glad you're doing this. Again, yeah, everyone, please go. You got to read the Grayzone, watch the Grayzone. Your live streams are usually on Fridays, but sometimes other days.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to do one this Friday, but if we don't, we'll do like a makeup one. And
Yeah.
it's me and Aaron Mate. I don't know if you've had him on, but you should.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And
Someone
Jeremy.
I also would recommend, one of the great Israeli journalists who's done so much deep research on everything that's playing out now before our eyes is David Sheen. So I
Oh,
would like to see him on your show.
all right. I don't know about him. Great. I will do that.
I'll connect you.
Please do. Yeah. All right, man. Thank you for this. I know you're exhausted. You're doing so much work. I appreciate it. So thanks again for coming on.
Well, thank you. And, it's been cathartic for me.
Good.
So
Hope so.
thanks as always.
All
Great
right.
seeing
This will
you.
be out soon. All right. Peace. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.